I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Hello. Well, the last episode we were talking about mutual aid and how to step into this new space where we reimagine and build new systems that don't rely on the government, the current government as it stands, and maybe even government in general. Like how I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot about how disconnected our society in the U.S. is. And this could be a global issue too, but as we're both on U.S. soil, coming at it from this lens and this community particularly, we don't know how to be connected with each other. And I remember when I first started learning about mutual aid, the difference between mutual aid and charity. I was raised to believe that charity was something you did and it was something that was important, but I had no clue about the difference between charity and mutual aid. And I'm still learning and still struggling with that. And not struggling. When I find myself in mutual aid communities, when people offer me, like, do you want to eat? Do you want a meal? I always refuse because I think I don't need to take from this well that is.
Oh, that's interesting.
Really for the people that need it. I don't need it. I can go but what I'm learning is that, or what I'm trying to unpack in my own brain is that I am worthy it's not the right word, but
a part of the community.
Yeah.
Of need. Like and it's as simple as that. You can eat
and I can eat.
Be a part of the experience.
Right. And there's in my segmented brain, in the silos that I have in my brain, I'm trying to unpack that and realize, and I know that that's a barrier for me, that's a barrier to how I come into community, come into mutual aid situations and that kind of thing. Anyway, I got off on a tangent.
Well, this is an important tangent that I'm appreciating you getting off on, because I think that people need to understand, because I'm also hearing folks that might be like, if you don't need it, then why take it? The part of mutual aid is if the food is being offered, you are accepting the food, and then you're also pouring food into the space in some way, resource. So it's a part of your sowing the seed into the soil and the resource of offerings that come out of that. And that's the difference with mutual aid. It's not so much I have, and so I'm going to help you. It's like we are a part of this community together. And how are we building together? How are we filling in? If I'm receiving something out of it, I'm pouring something back into it. And so people need to understand that component of mutual aid. And it's not like I have, so I don't need to. It's we're here together and we all are creating this like collective resource together.
And in the early days, I told myself that I was refusing to join in because I didn't want to take from a well that was so needed for others when I came from, affluence and could afford to do what I needed to do to support myself. And that's what I used to tell myself. But now I'm learning I believe that it's part of the whiteness that I was indoctrinated into, that creates a separateness for me. Yes. So if I walk into a mutual aid space and I'm not willing to sit down and eat of the same food that other people are eating, is that because I'm telling myself that it's because I don't need, so therefore I shouldn't take from others? But really, is it that it's a way of separating myself from people who need, that I'm not like them. I don't need. So it reinforces that whiteness narrative that I've got in my head, that I am better than, separate from, above, which is what supports the charity mindset. So I guess I said all that to say that I wanted to be clear in my understanding of the difference between charity and mutual aid. And so for anybody out there that looks like me, that's listening to this, if you haven't thought about the difference between those two things, I invite you to do so, to start to unpack that, because if you are in those environments, if you find yourself a person who wants to be involved in helping others, you could be causing harm even in that helping space. So I wanted to say that out loud before we went on.
But we're getting into what mutual aid is and taking care of each other and not creating harm. And it's always like the intention that people go into is with good, big hearts. But we're just also checking in on what the impact is for the intention of how you go into the space. And that's the beautiful thing about mutual aid being a wonderful tool for how we can come together in community and meet our needs and resources on a very ground level, or like a rooted level outside of the traditional structures that exist that do cause a separation, because we exist in a system of white supremacy and hierarchy and power and position.
Yeah. And I want to say out loud that I do believe that the government has a right, a duty, and a responsibility to take care of its citizens.
That's the purposeful. That's why we create governments.
Right. But I want to say it out loud because I feel like in these days of lots of dialogue around the importance of mutual aid, I hear people saying, in regular intervals, that we shouldn't be doing mutual aid because the government's supposed to be doing it. And so therefore we need to demand that the government do it because they're the ones that are supposed to. And I want to invite people to start to examine that. I'm not saying the government shouldn't be responsible for taking care of its citizens. They should. And as long as they're not, and as long as we have a government system that is so harmful, that is so bent with Project 2025 and all the things that we've been talking about in the last couple of episodes, is so bent on hurting people, especially people in Black and brown bodies, then we need to, it's a both and. We need to build the mutual aid, but we still need to demand that our government take care of its citizens, which it's supposed to do. So it's both and, it's not either or. And yeah, I just want to say that out loud.
Thank you for that. And I would offer another thing about what's happening with our government functioning and structures is that it's so far removed from a pulse on what is actually need from the larger majority of the country. And we're not, that is not a color or race or ethnicity thing. That is a resource thing in reality. That is like a food, that is a gas, transportation, that is a,
right now the government services the haves way more than they service the have-nots.
Absolutely.
In fact, I would say completely service the haves and no servicing to the have-nots,
consideration,
except for the little trickles to make themselves, look,
absolutely.
We do this.
And the haves are corporations, you know what I mean? So like, that's the other part. It's just like our government,
there's no humanity in it.
Yeah, our government is so separated from its citizenship and so much more supportive of its corporationship than our needs are not being met. And that's why we're having all of these major public health concerns. And I really wanted to talk about how we're defining what public health looks like in this moment in the context of the divisiveness that exists under these supremacist hierarchical structures that don't allow us to meet the needs of the larger demographic of the community. And so now we have legislation that is saying, because there is a demographic of the community that is growing so large, we want to get rid of them through ICE raids or public health issues where a number of people are dying off because there's infection and they can't get access to the healthcare that they need, or that there's people being killed by law enforcement, state agencies, ICE, police, or anything like that. And that is not being addressed in the way that the folks that are being harmed and impacted the most needed to be addressed. And one of those things that we can talk about is like the Nolan Wells situation that we know is going on currently as we are having this conversation.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a horrible situation. Unfortunately, it's not unusual. Mm-hmm. And
let's describe the situation for the listeners that are outside of the country that might not be aware of what we're talking about.
So Nolan Wells was a young black man who went on an excursion with, he was the only black person in the group. Everybody else was white, mostly white young men. And they were in Mississippi. They went off to what I would call a barrier island. I don't know if that's exactly what the terminology of it was, but it's an island. It doesn't have any inhabitants on it. So there's no infrastructure. There's no buildings. There's no roads. And it was over the 4th of July weekend. So a lot of people that live near the water, I used to live in Charleston, I used to live in Florida. So people that live near the water have there are a lot of water excursions on holidays like that. And they went off in a boat to this island, and Nolan is dead as a result of that night. And there's a lot of, they didn't find his body until I think a couple of days after July 4th. His white friends, the white male friends, had his phone with them. There were text messages that were deleted. There were the white friends. They have deleted all of their social media accounts. They have lawyered up. One of the white friends' mother is a judge. So the narrative has already been circulating that he was doing drugs, or that he was doing this, or he was doing that. And what I just heard last night, which I thought was interesting, was that there's now evidence, I guess maybe through videos that they've gotten off of other people's phones, that Nolan actually did leave that island. So the early narrative was that he never left the island, that he went off, he was chasing some girl, that he left his cell phone with his friends and told the friends to leave him. And so the friends took his cell phone and left him on this uninhabited island, of which 2 to 3 days later they find his body and he's gone. And the statement is that he drowned. I know that Colin Kaepernick, who is an ex-football player in the U.S., has paid for his independent autopsy because the family does not trust the state of Mississippi to do an autopsy that will show the actual true cause of death and not just push the narrative that the state of Mississippi would like to push. I know that Tyler Perry, I think, is paying for his funeral arrangements, who is a filmmaker here in the U.S., black filmmaker in the U.S. And so the story is unfolding, and the pressure that the community and the family and attorney Ben Crump, who has made a name for himself in supporting and representing families, black families of people who have been killed either extrajudicially by the police or in other circumstances, is representing the family. And the pressure is on to try to make sure that the real story of what happened to Nolan comes to light, because I'm sorry, his friends killed him. They killed him, or they had a hand in his death in some way, shape, or form. And they're covering it up, just like always happens with whiteness.
That's what I want to talk about. And that's like why this is like so important to have a conversation, because Nolan Wells is not the first black body that has been found dead after going and hanging out with white people. And so at this point in time, it's really important to kind of highlight that we're seeing that type of thing. It's also important to highlight the amount of violence against black and brown bodies that is increasing in this moment, and also against women that is increasing in this moment, which is a major public health issue. And so when we have these high profile cases that speak into the narrative, one, of communities and their understanding about what safety looks like when in this moment, when you are the only black and brown body going out with white folks and not coming home, what does that look like for how we continue to engage with each other? And then also what does it look like for how the state responds to who goes missing when, right? And that's like, that highlights another, because if multiple black bodies have been found dead and missing after going out with white folks and there's no accountability that's being held, now we're looking really back into like Jim Crow era, when black bodies were going hung, were found in rivers, eaten half by crocodiles, and all of these type of things, and there's no accountability to that behavior and harm, and policies are supporting that type of behavior and harm, then that becomes a major public health issue. When ICE has just kind of the free flow to just go and raid communities, and then there's a number of people that go missing with no accountability. When does our mutual aid kick in, and or our government kick in to then begin to really address this type of violence and harm to community members in our local geography? geographies.
And I would say in this Nolan case, you know, to me, the mutual aid that's kind of coming forward for me as I'm thinking about it is the Colin Kaepernick's paying for independent autopsies and Tyler Perry paying for, you know, that to me that's mutual aid. That's people with means, you know, coming into a situation and saying, we're going to put our resources into the situation so that the family gets the justice that they deserve. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It's infuriating that in 2026 we still have to do this. And the fact that it's Mississippi just makes it even more. I mean,
it's the South again. The South again.
Yeah.
We have to be real about like what our Southern culture looks like and the impact of our Southern culture on the rest of the United States and like what it is that we're experiencing. And then like we are already having this walk on eggshell divisiveness that exists in the United States with our social relationships. And so now you have these high profile cases where we're back to watch out for white folks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That conversation has never ended. Let me roll that back. But now it's like an open conversation where we're seeing this type of thing, or watch out for men, because we're seeing so many more women coming out with violence cases, and the state and the government not stopping in to create the protections that we're needed to create safety. And that is a major concern as we are thinking about 250-year anniversary of the United States and how we really are. I think you said 10 steps back. We're 100 steps back from where we had created environments where more people had access to safety, where we had larger and greater resources for what we know are public health issues, but at least being able to identify those things as public health issues and then try to policy resources to support those public health issues to reduce them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know exactly what the number is, but I want to say it's like 5 or 6 Black people who have just recently, in the past couple of months, been found hanging from trees. And the report that the medical examiner, it's in the United States, and the report from the medical examiner is always that it was a suicide. And every person that I've ever talked to that doesn't look like me says Black people will never hang themselves as a form of suicide. And so it is insane to me. I mean, it's not insane. I don't want to make it sound like I'm shocked and clutching my pearls. I know where this is coming from, but it is in this day and age, in this 2026, that this is happening on the regular, in the lexicon. And number one, they're not being talked about. You know, our media does not discuss. I mean, you didn't even know the young woman that was hung in Miami.
I had no idea.
You had no idea. I
was off the island, but I had no idea because you're not going to hear about it.
They weren't even talking about it. Yeah. So I think in my head, I think a lot about mutual aid when it comes to food access, housing access to medical care. Those are the 3 things that we tend to think about when we think about mutual aid. And I think we also need to think about mutual aid in terms of our society standing up and saying this is not okay. There are protests and there are people in the streets about Nolan Wells and supporting his family and demanding that these white boys and anybody that was in, because there were young women there too, are held accountable for their role in his death, whatever that role ends up being. It needs to be investigated. They need to, the heft and the fervor for which they would, if the roles were reversed and it was 5 Black kids and 1 white guy, and the white guy ended up dead, they would all be under the jail right now. All of those Black kids would have been
as soon as he didn't come back. As soon as
he
didn't come back,
the minute they would all be under the jail, and like Khalif Browder, God rest his soul, you know, would have stayed in jail indefinitely until you know, a trial was happening or whatever. And Khalif Browder was the 16-year-old who was sent to Rikers Island in New York, for allegedly stealing a backpack. He was kept in Rikers for months and months and months. And he was finally released because they didn't have any evidence. And it's a friggin' backpack, I'm sorry, in Rikers. And he ended up suiciding because he never was able to, it impacted him so deeply and broke his soul so deeply that he ended up suiciding. And so that's why I mention him in this, because this is not new. This is not new. And anybody that is horrified by what happened to Nolan, and what happened to all of these what has happened to all of these murdered and missing Indigenous women over the course of, I mean, this is not new. And
this is white violence. And until we name it as white violence, and I really want you to be able to speak into it, because I think it's appropriate for you to speak into it, because this level of white violence, when we are putting up a shade that shows that we are not acknowledging the level of white violence and the level of lack of safety that people hold in their bodies when this type of thing is existing, contributes to the harm and contributes to the violence in ways that are not helpful for our communities at all in this day and age.
Well, and to the point of a conversation that you and I had not long ago, I want to speak into, because you just brought up white violence, I want to speak into the fact that violence is not just physical violence, especially when it's white violence. White violence is violence in general, it doesn't have to have a racial component to it. Violence in general is not just physical. Violence can be, we talk about bullying being violence. Bullying is often verbal, right? Violence can be, it can take a lot of different forms. And I think our society, especially in the US, needs to start to examine why we only attribute violence to being physical. And in my experience, it's usually only people that look like me who identify violence as only being physical, only being through gun violence or fisticuffs or being beaten up or that kind of stuff. That's violence. But white violence is through whispers. White violence is through, Emmett Till was destroyed because a white woman thought he looked at her. That is, the Tulsa massacre happened because a black young man tripped when he was walking into an elevator and brushed up against a white woman that was in the elevator. And she said that he attacked her. And that's why 300 plus black people were murdered in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. So these are just two examples of white violence being based on, hey, I heard, this happened to me. And then
there's another component of it, especially if we're talking about things like Tulsa, when it's a Black Wall Street and there's an affluence of black affluence is happening, and there was
jealousy. White violence is jealousy.
White violence is jealousy.
Absolutely. It's jealousy. It's whispers. It's looks. When it's clutching of purses when a black person walks onto an elevator, that's white violence. It's crossing the street when a black person is walking on the same side of your street because you're afraid. That's white violence. So white people, we got to get better.
Criminalizing people with your language.
Criminalizing people.
Someone's lazy, or someone's an animal, or someone's unhinged, and all of that.
Yes.
That is a
language. Of white violence. I challenge all white people that are listening to this, if you're reading anything about Nolan Wells' death, challenge yourself to read the language. Look at the headlines. What kind of pictures do they use of Nolan? What kind of pictures do they use of the white suspects that I think had a hand in Nolan's death? What are the words that they're using? Because all of that is white violence. And whether or not it's a black journalist who's saying it or not, usually the publications are run by white people, and they're run by whiteness, and they're governed by whiteness. And so all of that is white violence. And it gets black and brown people and indigenous people killed every single day. And it is absolutely embedded in racial disparity from the rip. There's nothing. And so the fact that the narrative that whiteness purports that black people are so violent when we're the ones that are creating scenarios, either doing the violence or creating scenarios where the violence occurs because of our word. You just got to sit with that. If that upsets you, I invite you to
now say it again for those in the back that didn't hear it, that the violence occurs just on someone's word.
Oh, just on our word, on our look.
Mm-hmm.
Our look. White women tears. One of the most violent things out there is our use, our weaponization of our tears.
Yeah.
Our tears have gotten more Black people, Black and brown and indigenous people killed.
Mm-hmm. And the knowing of that, like the subconscious knowledge that that is true for everyone. I mean, not even if you are born in a white body, the impact of the knowledge of that and the way that you walk around, because that has been a context with which you've had to exist your entire life. It going back to what we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, is it goes back to the need for mutual aid and care and consideration of each other in community when our state, when our government is not protecting us to help to create those type of environments where we have to hold each other accountable in a way that's more humane than we do on our own. That's when the mutual aid comes in, where we can share food together and recognize each other's humanity, where we can pour into situations and not separate ourselves in the way that you were talking about, so that we don't have an understanding of our interconnectedness and our need to be in support of each other so that we can all have a better existence.
Yeah. And it may look like we have to show up, that we have to stand in a space and say, Nolan Wells was likely murdered and justice needs to be done. And how can we speak into that? That's also mutual aid.
That's mutual aid.
And, because I will always be safer, if I'm at a rally or we've talked about this before when I went to that rally in Charleston and the young white kids were raising hell and throwing bottles at the cops and doing all these things. And I looked at him and I said, you need to stop. I said, if the Black and brown people that are leading this rally are not doing that, then you need to stop. And they were like, well, but they're cops and ACAB. And I said, okay, I believe in that too. But you throw in that bottle, if they start coming at this crowd, you are not going to be injured. You are not going to be hurt. They are not going to
They're not going to say that it was you who was doing it.
Doesn't look like you.
And they're not going to say it was you who was doing it.
No, they're not.
That's the other part of that.
They were all bowed up and like, we're here and we love Black people and Black Lives Matter. Was back during George Floyd times. And so there was a lot of energy behind their behavior and they just wanted to be a part of the fray, but they had no understanding of the danger they were putting anybody around them that didn't look like them in, just so they could get their rocks off and feel good about throwing bottles at cops. And, so that's mutual aid. I feel like I'm preaching during this one. I get so fired up about this stuff.
No, as we should be fired up about it, because we have to recognize that it exists. When we don't acknowledge and name that it exists, then it's really hard to hold accountability for it and try to make amends and try to shift the way that we are existing. And so just naming it, having conversations about it, the way that we do in our podcast, and then identifying what the mutual aid ways that we can model and identify the gaps in the resources, and then call in our government to actually do what it's supposed to do, which is protect all of its citizens and all of the people that are trying to be called citizens. So when I see your face, that's what we want to make sure happens.
Somebody's calling you.
Love and care for each other more than we can.
Rest in power, Nolan Wells.
Yes, thank you so much.
Why do I give a fuck?
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.